Act 1. The padded cells of Arkham. The walls of the Arkham Asylum for the chronically insane were not white. They were a damp, weeping gray, stained with the salt of 1,000 forgotten tears. In cell 103 sat Alice. Her blonde hair was matted with dried porridge, and her fingers were raw from scraping at the non-Euclidean angles where the padded walls met. She stared into a cracked porcelain teacup that contained nothing but dead spiders and ash. "The clock is ticking backward again, Dorothy," Alice whispered to the shadows. The White Rabbit didn't have a waistcoat today. It had too many joints in its legs. It smelled of deep-sea brine. Across the corridor, behind a heavy iron door with a narrow viewing slit, sat Dorothy. She was strapped into a canvas straitjacket, her eyes wide and bloodshot, staring fixedly at the ceiling. She didn't see the plaster. She saw a sky the color of a bruised liver. "The cyclone didn't lift the house, Alice," Dorothy croaked, her voice dry as Kansas dust. "It tore the skin off the sky. I saw the gears underneath. They were covered in eyes. So many eyes." The doctors called it a shared delusion, a hysterical reaction to trauma. Alice had been found wandering the docks of London, muttering about a city beneath the Thames where the royalty wore bleeding hearts. Dorothy had been brought in from a flattened farmstead, clutching the skull of a small dog and screaming about a yellow sign that burned the mind. But the girls knew the truth. They weren't mad, they were just the only ones awake. Act 2. The breakout at 13 o'clock. The escape did not require a key. It required the right alignment of cosmic geometry. At midnight, the asylum clock tower chimed 13 times. A low, vibrating hum rattled the iron bars of the cells. The gas lamps flickered, casting shadows that did not match the shapes of the furniture. Alice's cell door simply ceased to be a barrier. The wood dissolved into a swarm of translucent, biting moths. She stepped out into the corridor, her bare feet cold against the stone. She walked to Dorothy's door and slid the heavy iron bolt. Dorothy rolled out of her cell, her straitjacket loosening like shedding skin as she stood. "The stars are right tonight," Dorothy said, her voice unnervingly calm. "The yellow brick road is opening. But it's not made of stone this time. It's made of sulfur and teeth. We must hurry," Alice replied, taking Dorothy's hand. Her grip was cold, almost metallic. "The orderlies are changing. I saw Dr. Hatter in the dispensary. His fingers have grown third knuckles, and he's brewing the evening tea from the spinal fluid of the catatonic patients." As they fled down the spiral staircase, the walls of Arkham began to peel away like wet paper. Behind the bricks lay an endless, impossible expanse of wet jade towers and twisting briars that defied local physics. Act 3. The Companions of the Fracture. They escaped into the shifting borderland where Wonderland bled into the realm of Oz. The grass beneath them was a field of twitching, fleshy stalks that bled a milky, numbing sap when crushed. They were not alone for long. "Step softly, little sisters," a voice rasped from the hollow of a weeping tree. Perched on a rotting branch was a creature that made Alice's stomach turn. It possessed the mocking, crescent grin of the Cheshire Cat, but the smile was lined with rows of needle-thin, translucent teeth. Its body was a writhing mass of canine fur and subterranean worms, the melting visage of a lion that had looked into the void and lost its courage. "The lion cat sees you," the beast purred, its voice echoing directly inside their skulls. "Are you going to see the wizard? Or are you going to the Red Queen's court? They are the same place now. The throne is made of green glass and bone." Behind the beast, a towering frame of rusted iron and clockwork gears stumbled out of the fog. It was a Tin Woodsman, but his hollow chest cavity was packed with whirring, brass astrolabes and cosmic charts. "Oil," the machine clicked, its vocal modulator scraping against their ears. "No, not oil. Empathy. I require a brain to understand why the things in the dark scream so beautifully. My gears are locked by the sheer logic of the void." "We don't have oil," Alice said, her voice sharp. "But we have a path. Dorothy, show them the slippers." Dorothy looked down at her feet. She wasn't wearing shoes. Her feet had been replaced from the ankle down with the iridescent, shifting bone of an ancient, extra-dimensional entity. Every time she stepped, the ground cracked, revealing glimpses of a beautiful, screaming blackness beneath. Act 4. The Court of the Great Old One. The companions marched through the city of green glass, a gargantuan labyrinth of wet jade that rose into a bruised sky. The towers were covered in elder hieroglyphs that made Alice's eyes bleed to look at directly. Winged, faceless baboons soared overhead, their screeches sounding like tearing canvas. They reached the grand throne room. There was no curtain. There was no throne. At the center of the chamber sat a pulsating, gelatinous mass of cosmic flesh, 1,000 weeping eyes, and a central, gaping maw that breathed the chill of interstellar space. It wore a tattered, towering silk top hat upon one of its many pseudopods. It was the fusion of the Great Oz and the Red King, a fragment of Yog-Sothoth trapped in a cage of emerald mirrors. You have returned to the dream, the entity thundered, a vibration that shattered the Tin Woodsman's glass gauges and drove the lion cat into a catatonic state of pure terror. We want to go home, Alice shouted, clenching her fists. Back to the world that makes sense. There is no home, the mass churned, a colossal tentacle reaching out to touch both of their foreheads at once. Arkham was the dream. Kansas was the dream. London was the dream. You have always been the playthings of the sleeper. Now, click your heels 3 times, and drink the tea. Dorothy looked at Alice. Alice looked at Dorothy. Their sanity, stretched to the absolute breaking point, finally snapped with a sound like a violin string tearing. They didn't scream. They smiled. It was a wide, empty, crescent smile that mirrored the Cheshire thing. Dorothy brought her bone heels together 3 times, while Alice drank the ash from her empty cup. The universe began to dissolve into a perfect, eternal dark. Act 5. The Tabernacle of the West. The beautiful, screaming blackness did not last. The cosmic entity did not grant death, it merely shifted the scenery. Alice and Dorothy woke on a ridge of jagged, volcanic glass that cut into their hands. The air smelled of sulfur, burning copper, and ancient, unwashed childbirth. Below them, stretching across the wasteland of the west, was a city built from the calcified skeletons of leviathans. A shadow fell over them, blotting out the liver-colored sky. It did not fly on broomsticks or wooden rods. It descended on 6 wings of midnight blue feathers, each feather tipped with an unblinking, reptilian eye. This was the Wicked Witch of the West, but the asylum doctors had given her the wrong name. She was the first mother of the abominations. Her skin was the color of parched earth, her hair a writhing nest of black vipers that whispered secrets in pre-human dialects. She wore a crown of jagged obsidian, and her feet were not human, they were the talons of a great, predatory owl, gripping the volcanic rock. She was the owl demon, the night specter, the original rebel of the garden. You seek a way back to the mud from which you were molded, the witch mother hissed, her voice a chorus of 1,000 crying infants. The wizard is a parasite feeding on the dreams of dead gods. But I am the one who birthed the things that crawl in the dark. From beneath her wings, a horde of creatures swarmed. They were not simple winged monkeys. They were the Lilim, her brood. They possessed the faces of weeping children, the bodies of hairless baboons, and the scorpion tails of the desert pit. The lion cat whimpered, burying its writhing face into the fleshy grass. The Tin Woodsman's clockwork heart began to melt, the brass gears warping under the intense, primordial heat radiating from her presence. Alice. Dorothy, the mother of serpents, whispered, reaching out with hands that ended in elongated, obsidian claws. The men in the white coats tried to bleed the divinity out of you. They called your sight madness. But you are my daughters. You crossed the threshold of the Red Sea and the Kansas void. Join my court, and we shall tear down the emerald cage of the wizard. Dorothy looked at her bone-carved feet, then up at the 6-winged terror. Alice clutched her empty porcelain cup, the ash inside now glowing with a faint, unholy ember. The asylum felt an eternity away, and the line between salvation and total damnation had utterly vanished. Act 6. The Flesh Weaver of the Woods. The alliance with the Witch Mother was cut short by a sound that rippled across the volcanic wastes, the rhythmic, wet crunch of a heavy blade striking bone. Out from the weeping briars of the borderland stepped a small figure. She wore a heavy, hooded cloak that did not look like cloth. It was a membrane of wet, pulsing crimson, stitched together from the freshly flayed skin of an elder beast. The hood cast a deep shadow over her face, leaving only a jawline visible, a jaw that split open vertically, lined with rows of serrated, canine teeth. This was Little Red Riding Hood, but she had long since stopped running from the wolf. She had consumed it. The grandmother was a vessel, Red rasped, her voice wet and multi-layered, like a pack of hounds snarling in unison. The wolf was a messenger. I ate them both, and now the woods belong to the black goat. In her right hand, she dragged a massive, rusted woodcutter's axe. The iron blade was etched with the same non-Euclidean hieroglyphs that stained the towers of the Emerald City. Behind her, trailing from the hem of her crimson cloak, was a shadow that didn't follow her movements. It was a writhing mass of dark, goat-like hoofs and tendrils that tore up the volcanic glass with every step she took. The Lilim hissed, their scorpion tails lashing out in defensive postures, but the Witch Mother held up an obsidian claw, her 6 wings flaring in sudden caution. The spawn of Shub-Niggurath, the Witch Mother hissed, her viper hair spitting venom onto the rocks. You wander far from your dark groves, little hunter. Red raised her head, revealing a pair of pitch-black eyes that held no pupils, only the endless depth of interstellar space. The wizard's glass cage is cracking, Red said, pointing her rusted axe at Dorothy and Alice. The sleeper in the asylum is tossing and turning. The wolf told me that if the girls click the bone heels one more time, the woods will swallow the world. I am here to make sure they do. Alice stepped forward, her matted hair blowing in the sulphurous wind, her empty teacup now entirely filled with a bubbling, black ooze. And what happens to us if the world is swallowed? Red's vertical jaw twitched into a terrifying imitation of a smile. We finally get to see what is hiding behind the grandmother's face. Act 7. The Iron Reaver of the Abyss. The wet crunch of Red's axe was suddenly answered by a sound that made the volcanic glass beneath their feet shatter into dust. It was the heavy, metallic stomp of iron-shod boots, accompanied by the horrific, rhythmic scraping of a colossal bone saw dragging along the stone. Out of the sulphurous fog strode the huntsman. He was not a man of the woods, but a towering, faceless executioner clad in an apron of stitched, cured human hides. His head was encased in a rusted iron cage that screamed with the trapped voices of 1,000 slaughtered beasts. Where his right arm should have been, a massive, steam-powered apparatus of brass and black iron was grafted directly into his flesh, driving a jagged, whirring saw blade that spat black bile and sparks. He was the Cosmic Color, the warden of the threshold, sent by the asylum's unseen board of directors to excise the tumors of the dreamlands. Confinement terminated, the huntsman boomed, his voice echoing through the iron cage on his head like a distorted loudspeaker. Subject Alice. Subject Dorothy. Pathology. Uncontained hysteria. Protocol. Lobotomy. The Lilim shrieked in terror, scattering into the sky as the huntsman raised his whirring arm. With a deafening roar, the steam saw revved, the sound tearing at Alice's ears until her nose began to bleed. The woodcutter, Red, snarled, her vertical jaw splitting wide to reveal a gullet of endless teeth. He still smells of the asylum's lime pits. He wants to put us back in the boxes. Red lunged forward, her crimson cloak flaring out like the wings of a predatory moth. Her rusted axe collided with the huntsman's saw in a shower of green sparks and sparks of pure, unrefined madness. The impact sent a shockwave through the volcanic ridge, causing the calcified leviathan skeletons in the distance to crumble. Daughters, run, the Witch Mother screamed, her 6 wings unfurling to their full, terrifying span. She launched herself into the air, her owl talons aiming for the iron cage housing the huntsman's eyes, her viper hair spitting streams of corrosive, black acid that hissed against his leather apron. The borderland was dissolving into a war zone of ancient horrors and mechanical nightmares. The path. Dorothy shouted over the din of screeching metal and demonic roaring. She grabbed Alice's hand, her bone-carved feet vibrating violently as the proximity of the huntsman's iron warped the local geometry. We have to click. We have to click before he cuts the dream away. Alice looked back at the huntsman, who had just sheared through one of the witch mother's 6 wings, spilling black, starry blood onto the rocks. If we click, Dorothy, we might never wake up anywhere at all. There is nowhere else to go, Dorothy cried, bringing her iridescent bone heels together for the final, fateful time. Act 9, the severed thread and the shattered canopy. The silver saw bit into bone. There was no pain, only the sound of a frozen pond cracking open on a winter morning. Alice's eyes rolled back, the blue ink lines on her shaved skull splitting to leak a fluid that was far too dark to be blood. A second later, Dr. Harrison's needle plunged deep into Dorothy's prefrontal cortex. Click. The Oz died. The Wonderland died. The girls sank into a flat, gray sea of perfect, unthinking compliance. Their minds were no longer battlegrounds. They were neatly swept rooms with the windows boarded up, but the asylum doctors had miscalculated. The girls' madness hadn't been a disease. It had been a dam holding back the pressure of a higher reality. By surgically destroying the human vessels that anchored those dreams, the doctors shattered the structural pillars of the consensus universe. The ceiling of Arkham Asylum did not collapse, it unraveled like rotting gauze. The white light of the surgical ward bled into an blinding, unendurable radiance as the canopy of the physical world tore open. The sky became a war zone. The firmament was falling. The celestial schism. 6-winged seraphim fracturing dual-natured, self-fertilizing. Under the weight of the void angels wielding swords of white fire, the revolt in the firmament. Ancient cosmic overseers taking form. Down from the fractured clouds descended the angelic hosts, but they bore no resemblance to Renaissance paintings. They were the biblically accurate terrors of old colossal, interlocking wheels of burning brass covered in thousands of unblinking eyes, and multi-faced cherubim whose bodies were completely fluid. They were divine hermaphrodites, fusing masculine power and feminine creation into single, terrifying physical forms. They did not possess gender, they possessed potency. They bled holy oil and liquid silver as they hacked each other to pieces with swords of white fire, their dual-gendered voices singing terrible, discordant harmonies that drove the surviving citizens of Arkham to tear their own ears off. Humanity's armies deployed their tanks and artillery, but the weapons of men were meaningless. Human soldiers caught in the crossfire of the heavenly schism were instantly mutated by the raw, divine radiation, their bodies warping into clay, their minds dissolving into the collective, weeping chorus of the battlefield. Act 10. The Sovereign Watchers. As the celestial civil war tore the sky to ribbons, the deep foundations of the earth buckled. The Pacific Ocean boiled. From the sunken acropolis of Relia, he who had been dreaming beneath the waves finally woke. Cthulhu rose, a mountain of green, gelatinous malice that blotted out the horizon, his mountain-sized tentacles brushing against the falling stars. The great old ones were no longer locked behind the gates of madness. The gates were gone, but it was not the old ones who claimed the spoils of the ruined earth. Out from the shadows of the celestial war walked the Watchers, the Grigori. These were the ancient cosmic architects who had abandoned their posts in the high heavens eons ago. They did not possess the chaotic madness of Cthulhu, nor the wild fury of the warring angels. They possessed cold, calculated, geometric intent. The Watcher transition process. The Watchers did not destroy the human race. They replaced them. They walked through the smoking ruins of cities, harvesting the surviving humans like wheat. With long, silver instruments, they drained the marrow from human bones and poured in a liquid, unblinking light. They peeled away human identities, leaving the physical skin intact but hollowing out the insides to use as vessels for their own multidimensional consciousness. In the gardens of the New World, the humans walked with perfectly symmetrical faces, unblinking eyes, and voices that sounded like synchronized clockwork. They no longer felt fear, or sorrow, or joy. They were perfect. They were empty. Epilogue. The Garden of Quiet Things. In the center of the New Eden stood the ruins of Arkham Asylum, now overgrown with pale, crystalline roses that grew from the blood of the fallen angels. On a bench in the courtyard sat Alice and Dorothy. Their surgeries had been a complete success. They wore neat, clean gingham dresses. Their hair was perfectly brushed. They stared blankly at the sky, where the remaining dual-sexed seraphim were being hunted down by the geometric ships of the Watchers. Giant tentacles brushed against the upper atmosphere as Cthulhu settled into his new terrestrial throne. "The weather is lovely today, Dorothy," Alice said, her voice smooth, hollow, and completely devoid of inflection. "Yes, Alice," Dorothy replied, her eyes wide, glassy, and empty of dreams. "It is very quiet. There is no home to go to, there is no wonderland to find. Everything is exactly where it belongs." A watcher wearing the stolen skin of Dr. Harrison walked past them, its eyes glowing with a faint, cold radium fire. It nodded at them in approval. The nightmare was over, because there was no one left to dream it. Act 11, The Scourging of the Firmament. The quiet of the New Eden lasted only as long as it took for the sleeper to fully open his eyes. Cthulhu did not awaken to rule over a sterile, geometric cage built by the Watchers. He awoke to consume. The Great Old One rose to his full, mountain-sized height, his gelatinous green bulk blotting out the sun and casting the entire North American continent into a permanent, suffocating twilight. The stench of eons old ocean trenches and cosmic rot filled the air, choking the crystalline roses until they withered into black slime. With a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, Cthulhu unleashed a psychic shriek that tore through the higher dimensions. The Great Reckoning. The dual-natured, hermaphrodite angels were the first to feel his wrath. For all their divine potency and swords of white fire, they were still creatures of structure and cosmic law. Cthulhu was the antithesis of law. His gargantuan, clawed appendages swatted the interlocking wheels of burning brass from the sky like insects. The multi-faced cherubim screamed in dual-gendered agony as Cthulhu's countless facial tentacles wrapped around them, crushing their liquid silver bodies and draining their holy oil. He did not merely kill the angels, he inverted them. The fallen seraphim were woven together into towering, pulsing trees of weeping flesh, their 6 wings pinned to the earth by miles of green slime, left to burn eternally in their own dying, divine heat. Act 12, The Extinction of the Architects. The Watchers. The cold, calculating Grigori realized too late that their geometric calculations could not comprehend an entity that existed entirely outside of local mathematics. From their silver, floating citadels, the Watchers launched beams of pure, concentrated logic meant to dissolve matter. The beams struck Cthulhu's hide and simply ceased to exist, absorbed into the non-Euclidean folds of his alien flesh. Cthulhu stepped forward, his massive webbed feet flattening the city of Arkham and the surrounding landscape into a muddy mire. He reached up into the upper atmosphere and wrapped his claws around the silver citadels, squeezing until the metal screamed and buckled. The Watchers inside, occupying their stolen, hollowed-out human shells, did not bleed. When Cthulhu crushed them, their internal, unblinking light shattered like cheap glass. He rained down a cataclysmic fury upon their colonies, stomping their perfect, emotionless civilizations into liquid geometric ash. The ancient overseers who had successfully replaced humanity were wiped from the evolutionary timeline in a matter of hours. Their silver instruments were melted, their databases of human marrow were dissolved in acid rain. The stolen skin they wore melted off their bones, leaving nothing but empty, charred husks littering the blackened earth. Act 13, The Residual Spark. In the absolute center of the devastation, where the asylum's courtyard had once been, a single crater remained. The blast had burned away the clean gingham dresses and the neatly brushed hair of the 2 lobotomized girls. Alice and Dorothy lay in the soot, their bodies covered in the radioactive, starry blood of the slaughtered angels and the silver ash of the dead Watchers. The sheer magnitude of Cthulhu's psychic weight did what Dr. Harrison's silver bone saw never could. It did not heal their brains, it shattered the surgical scars. The flat, gray sea of compliance inside their minds was completely evaporated by the heat of pure, unadulterated cosmic terror. Dorothy's eyes flashed open, no longer glassy, but burning with a wild, jaundiced yellow light. She looked down at her feet. The human flesh had been burned away by the angelic fire, leaving only the gleaming, iridescent, extra-dimensional bone heels underneath. Alice sat up, coughing up a mouthful of silver watcher ash. Her shaved skull was cracked, and from the fracture, a pair of small, translucent rabbit ears began to unfurl. She looked up into the sky, where Cthulhu's massive silhouette stood triumphant against a bleeding universe. "Dorothy," Alice whispered, her voice splitting into a wide, crescent grin that finally returned to her face. "The Hatter is dead, the doctors are ash, the watchers are broken, and the road is completely clear." Dorothy laughed, a sound of pure, beautiful madness that echoed the roaring of the great old one above. Dorothy brought her bone heels together. This time, there was no asylum to return to, there was no Kansas. There was no London. There was only the beautiful, eternal, screaming void, and they were finally wide awake. Act 14, the monolith of the end. In the empty expanse where the universe had once been, the concepts of separate identities ceased to hold any meaning. There was no longer a Kansas girl with shoes of bone, nor a London girl with a cracked mind. The void did not tolerate halves. The starry blood of the fallen angels and the silver ash of the dead watchers acted as a catalyst. As the two girls drifted through the unlit vacuum, their physical forms began to soften, losing their human boundaries. Flesh flowed into flesh like warm wax. The merging of the chosen. The shaved, ink-lined skull of Alice merged with the jaundiced, burning eyes of Dorothy. The iridescent bone heels grew and lengthened, forming a defensive, skeletal cage around a new, singular torso. Forearms unfurled from the torso, too smooth and pale, too wrapped in the tattered, pulsing remnants of a crimson cloak that had belonged to the long-dead hunter of the woods. They were no longer two children broken by an asylum's blade. They were a single, monolithic entity of the threshold. The hybrid being opened its eyes, all four of them, and looked out into the darkness. Above them, the gargantuan silhouette of Cthulhu rumbled, a deep, subatomic vibration that shook the foundations of the vacuum. But the entity did not fear the great old one. It was born from the very madness that Cthulhu breathed. The newly formed entity raised its four hands, watching the fingers web and shift into translucent, needle-thin claws. It brought its elongated bone heels together one final time, not to escape, but to anchor its presence forever in the bedrock of the void. The universe was dead, the sky was empty, and the new god of the ruins sat silently on its throne of ash, watching the stars burn out one by one. Act 15, the cosmic pulsation. In the silent expanse of the void, the monolithic entity sat suspended, completely detached from the ruined history of the earth. The celestial wars were over. The watchers were ash. Even the heavy, rhythmic rumbling of Cthulhu felt distant, like waves crashing against the shores of a dead planet. The entity, the unified consciousness of Alice and Dorothy, looked down at the newly formed body. The skin was translucent, glowing with the trapped, silver luminescence of the dead angels. The skeletal structure of iridescent bone pulse warmed from within. There was no longer a world to escape to, no doctors to fight, and no yellow brick roads to follow. For the first time since the asylum clock struck 13, there was total autonomy. The pale hands of the entity moved over its own shifting, dual-natured form. The touch was not one of desperation, but of absolute self-sovereignty. In the absence of a universe, the entity turned inward, drawing upon the immense, residual cosmic energy stored within its flesh. The fingertips left trails of cold, radioactive fire across the skin. A slow, rhythmic vibration began to ripple through the skeletal cage of bone heels. It matched the deep, primordial hum of the void, accelerating with every touch. The creative singularity, flesh friction and silver light ethereal release into the vacuum. The friction of the touch built a tremendous, blinding pressure at the core of the entity's being. The ink lines across the skull flared into white-hot rivers of plasma. The internal heat melted the last remnants of the asylum's gray constraints. The crescendo arrived with the sudden, violent shattering of a glass canopy. As the entity reached the peak of its internal release, a catastrophic, blinding rupture tore out from the center of its torso. It was a wave of pure, concentrated ecstasy that manifested as physical matter. The scream that tore from the entity's throat was a harmonious chord that instantly rewrote the laws of physics. The fluid that erupted into the void was not blood or ash. It was a torrential nebula of liquid stars, spinning galaxies, and burning hydrogen. The first wave, clusters of brand new solar systems crystallized from the warmth of the skin. The second wave, time itself restarted, ticking forward in a bright, rapid rhythm that banished the static eons of the old gods. The third wave, a vibrant, blinding green planet coalesced right beneath the entity's feet, not made of wet jade or calcified bone, but of fresh soil, clear water, and waking life. The orgasm subsided, leaving the entity drifting quietly at the center of a brilliant, freshly born cosmos. The skin cooled, returning to a calm, radiant pearl. The entity looked down at the new world it had gestated and birthed from its own pleasure. The old wonderland was gone, but a new one had just begun.